Hi, in this video we're going to take a quick look at the Modbus part of the Babel Buster Model MQ61 IoT Gateway. The gateway can be either a master or a slave for either Modbus RTU or TCP or both. RTU of course can only be master or slave, one or the other. TCP can be both at the same time. Looking at the RTU setup, here's where you select master or slave. If you're going to have the gateway be a Modbus slave, just check slave and give it an address. Master, just check master, tell it a default poll rate and a timeout value. The timeout is if the gateway gets no response from the Modbus slave that it's attempting to poll, then after this amount of time it will flag that as an error and just move on. And of course either way we need to set a baud rate and parity. Now if the gateway is going to be a Modbus slave, then you don't really have to do any more configuration. Just have your master go ahead and start polling the local registers in the gateway. If you want the gateway to be a Modbus master, then besides telling it to be a master here, you need to come over here and start setting up some read maps. And this is for reading data from other Modbus slaves. And if you also want to write data out to those slaves, you can come over here and create some write maps. But the read maps, you can set up most of the read functionality right here from the tabular list. Select a register type, register format, register number, what the remote unit number or slave address is, and what local register you want to put that data in. If you want to get at more detail, just come over here and click on the map number. And here we have some additional parameters where you can do things like bit masking, data scaling, applying default values, and so on. And all of this is described in detail in the user guide. And also down here in the quick help section on each page. TCP setup is reasonably similar, except over here we need to set up some IP addresses. And the way we do that is we create device instances starting at 1 and simply put in an IP address, either v4 or v6 or domain lookup. Give it a local name. If you're going to use domain lookup, you would put the domain name down here in this window. And port number is usually going to be the standard Modbus TCP port 502. Then when you come over and look at the read maps, we identify which IP address simply by device name. And that's an easy way to read a whole bunch of registers from a single IP address. It's necessary to define devices in this manner because we cannot attempt to create multiple connections to the same IP address. And so the same socket is used for any given IP address within the device list. And then over here, the multiple mappings are processed in round-robin fashion using that same TCP socket. And here again, we got the same options that we had over in RTU. Select a register type, format, remote register number, local register we want to store it in. The only thing that's different is we select a TCP device instead of a slave address. And then come over here and click on the map number. We still get the same details like bit masking and data scaling and so on. Write maps are going to work pretty much the same way, except you do have some additional options. You can write periodically, or you can write to the remote Modbus device only when the local register changes by a certain amount. That in effect eliminates unnecessary updating of registers in the remote device. And other than that, the rest of the parameters are very similar to what you see in a read map. Now once you've got everything set up and all your mapping done, you can come over and take a look at the data page and see what data the registers or the read maps are currently pulling in, and more importantly, check your error counts. Here we can see that we have this number of total messages and we have no errors. And we have the same thing over here on the TCP side. If there were some errors, by the way, you could come over here and look specifically at the errors pages, and it would tell you which particular read maps are having issues. And we have the same thing over on the TCP side. We can look at the data, come over here and look at the counts, and if there were errors, we could come over here and look at the specific errors, and it would tell us which particular map the error was applying to. And that is a quick overview of setting up and doing diagnostics on Modbus. And most of what we looked at here is assuming that the gateway is going to be a Modbus master, or on the TCP side a client, or call it a master if you will. And if you are going to have the gateway be an RTU slave or a TCP server, there's really, other than RTU, setting the baud rate for RTU, there really isn't any configuration you need to do. You just would configure your external Modbus master to start polling registers and looking for these register numbers. And all of the local registers in the gateway can be accessed as holding registers. You can read or write them as holding registers. You can read them as input registers. You can also treat them as coils or status inputs. And that's it for a quick overview of Modbus in the MQ61 gateway.